Welcome to VUC 2019, Visions Under Construction. Right, VUC745, March 29th, 2019. If I'd have known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. And we need to talk about Carnegie World, Berlin, May 6th to 8th, 2019. Many of us are arriving the 5th. If you're in Berlin or in reach of Berlin, by the way, May 5th, Sunday, maybe reach out somehow. Like, I can't think of a good way, but you'll find it. Next thing up, there's an intruder. Intruder alarm. You can make noise. It's okay. It won't hear. ComCon. There we go. Oops. ComCon. 7th to 11th of July in Birminghamshire, UK, United Kingdom. That was a fantastic event last year. So if you're in range, check it out. It's unique too, because they do their own hosting in a really nice property, like a castle almost. Beautiful grounds, terrific. ClueCon, August 5th to 8th in Chicago. Boy, talk about familiar faces. I'm trying to figure out if there's anybody here I have not seen. We have Simon Woodhead, Michael Jarris, David Duffett. Looks like Fred. No, that's not Fred. Maybe Fred. Mira, and everybody, a whole bunch of people that we know.
Fred is in the back there, and Dan
Is that
Lane.
Fred? With the yellow. Yeah, all right.
That's Fred. Yeah.
There's and the next thing is the IIT real-time communications with associated somehow with TADHack. That's in Chicago, October 12th, 13th, and 14th, 16th in Chicago. And very confusing. Let me move over to the actual camera, and then we can get started on the topic.
You know, they are the folks, the IIT folks. They are the ones who are always working on next generation 911 service. Really? And auto location. Last year at ClueCon, they did a presentation that was a mock-up of a system that did auto location of people within a building based on their cell phones using WebRTC.
Yeah, I know they are at the forefront. This is the serious level. I mean, they're associated with the university, right? If I'm not mistaken. Yep. And it's serious science, I would call that. But anyway, yes, that would be something if one is in range of Chicago in October, go for that. So it's about time. First of all, today, ironically, we are starting an hour early in Europe. And for you, Jay, right? It would be an hour earlier since you guys aren't on, right?
No, actually, we're starting at the time that we usually start here in Arizona for the VUC. So, which is noon Eastern.
Well, noon Eastern, but your time is what?
It's 9:05 a.m. right now. So we're 3 hours behind New York or Eastern time. So, you know, when daylight savings changes, then we would be starting here in Arizona at 10 a.m. instead of 9 a.m.
Right. So all winter you were 10 a.m., right?
Correct.
Okay, correct. So that's what I mean. So for you, there are two times. It changes once, and then it's changed until it comes back in the end of summer. For us here in Europe, we have a 3-week difference. So on each end. So for 3 weeks, for me, for example, right now, or for James, if for the people in the UK, the United Kingdom, it's an hour difference. We are moving to daylight time. Everybody says daylight savings time. It's saving time, apparently. And that will be this Sunday at 2 a.m. It becomes 3 a.m. Anyway, there is the notion of that, which is crazy. As I was telling Michael earlier, I believe the EU has a proposition to drop that whole mania in 2020 or 2021 or 2022, I'm not sure. Next couple of years. The U.S. has made a lot of proposals, probably for the past 20 years. Nothing has happened. I don't know if there's anything serious in store, but there are, I don't know, 3 states. I think Hawaii does not change. Arizona, Jay, your state, and I think New Mexico maybe too. I'm not positive. There's at least
And
one other.
it gets weirder than that, because up in Canada, I don't know about the entire country, but there are 3 towns, small cities, if you will, in Northern Ontario that don't change time arbitrarily. And so the little town where I grew up, town of Atikokan, which is a population of about 3,000 these days, has
2,999 since you left.
Yeah, well, I haven't been there in a long time. My sister is still there, though. They are on the same. They're on Eastern time with Toronto half the year, and they're on Central time with Winnipeg, Chicago, the other half of the year. And the weirdest part is they're substantially west of Chicago, and yet they're on Eastern time sometimes. And the origin of that goes back to the early 1950s, when Kalen Door Company started. They built what was then the world's largest open pit iron mine there, and for some reason they had to stay on the same time zone as someplace else that was outside the U.S., and so they didn't have daylight savings, and it had to do with shipping.
That's a good reason, though.
Yeah, I guess. And they've had a half a dozen plebiscites to normalize, and basically everybody in the town says, nah.
No, they are normal. They are normal. The rest of us should normalize and not do this. There's no good. I don't know. Maybe there is an argument someplace for this. The way, to me, the way the normal world should work, there should be 3 towns on the planet, or three areas where it's really logical to do this, and they do it, and then the rest of us don't have to worry about it.
So I am not going to. I am going to be the antithesis to Corrado's rant, if you will.
Okay.
And because Corrado posted in the Wire chat earlier the George Carlin bit on time is an affectation. Time is an invention of people, and like so many things, like smartphones or Hangouts or anything, you can use it or you can abuse it. However, there is a sort of a fundamental underlying reality that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so that's the thing I have. I'm not the biggest guy. I do believe in being on time. I don't believe, I believe it's disrespectful to be tardy, but I don't believe in sort of everything being hyper regimented. Unless you're writing software, in which case you have to look for timing and things and the behavior of your systems. But insofar as carbon-based life forms are concerned, it's useful.
Well, there has to be definitions of words. There has to be schedules of some kind. And I mentioned one of the things about time is if you go to a conference, you get a schedule, and that schedule has times. Not that they work out exactly. Usually, there's always things get late, just like they get late at a doctor's office, right? But there has to be some semblance of order, and that semblance comes from saying, hey, David Duffett starts at noon, and then whoever else, Leif Erikson starts at 1 o'clock, and so on.
Let me throw out a question to you all, because I would like to prey upon your wisdom, and that is, I would assert that people often say that there's not enough time, and I think that's simply untrue. There's no shortage of time. Time simply is. However, when we make such a statement, what we're asserting is that we're not making good choices about how we use our time, or we don't want to make choices about how we use our time. So any reflection on that?
I think you're right, but I've spoken enough, so let's hear what Jay has to say.
Well, I think that it's akin to money. We always say, hey, there's not enough money. And in fact, we generally generate enough money so that, we get what we need at a minimum. But time is kind of the same thing. And it's basically, how do we use it? And are we satisfied with the use of our time? And this is an interesting topic. if I could bring in an outside resource that's on point, in my view, I listen to a weekly podcast called Econ Talk, and I'm going to share my screen.
I was referred to that recently, actually.
Yeah. So this this podcast, actually, this week's podcast is about time, and the topic is, or the author of the book that's related to this was saying that. Let's see if we can share this here. This is, hopefully you can see that, but Daniel Hammermesh, who's a professor somewhere, Barnard College, I guess. He talks about time, and he wrote a book about this, and he wanted to call it our most precious asset. And I think it probably is our most precious asset, because in our context of life, it is kind of inelastic. It does march on according to a set schedule.
Well, like you say about real estate, Jay, they're not making anymore.
Yeah, well, that's a little bit.
That's actually not true, right?
It's not true.
In Florida, it's definitely not true. Anyway, sorry,
true.
I'll interject.
But so anyway, this is this week's episode. It's about time, and they go through an interesting conversation, an academic conversation, in fact, about how time is spent and so forth. Basically, some of the economics and how we trade off different things for time and spend our time. So, it's kind of somewhat in the eye of the beholder, I guess. Is, and we are a beholder as well as everybody else, but if I'm sitting around just staring off into space or meditating or whatever, other people might say, well, you're wasting time. But there is a value and a utility to it that that prompts me to allocate my particular time for that particular purpose accordingly. So I don't know. Does that shine any light on this topic?
I would say immediately, Jay, that the idea of spending time thinking about things, daydreaming, whatever it may be, is less idle than the time that a lot of people spend on Facebook. And I don't want to bash Facebook. I'm not bashing Facebook just to do it. What I'm saying is that we all spend time on certain things that actually would be better spent. And certainly compared to what you just described of ideation, right? Kind of. I mean, because daydreaming, you're not really, anybody with a brain isn't really ever daydreaming. You're thinking always. You can't turn that off. I mean, well, meditation, I suppose you could, but that's important. And I know that I spend a lot of time hearing music in my head, and I know that's not lost time. What is lost time is correcting people on the internet when they're wrong.
Well, so Randy, I did, as we're talking about this, you being a musician, I think brings up some interesting time elements, because a musician and music is set to time in some form or fashion. And as you jam with other musicians, there's kind of a sharing of time, which blends into the artistry of what you're creating. So, it's interesting how music is generally a certain length of time, at least in different genres. And if you exceed that length of time, or if you go less than that length of time in particular genres, it starts to get outside the norm, and it can be problematic.
That's interesting that you mentioned that. I want to talk about something related, but I want to call on Michael in case, because I talk a lot and I don't want to talk the whole time. Michael, did you have something else?
In reference to the earlier point, there's only one thing, and that is time spent in thought. If you're a thoughtless person, is wasted, maybe, but that's for someone else to decide. But my mother and I had a conversation a long time ago and it revolved around the idea, the differential between being a human being or a human doing. And oftentimes how they value time is people who are always doing something, whereas it's okay to just sit and chill for a while and be introspective or thought or have a nap. It's not that it has no value, but it's a question of what you value. So yeah.
Well, you know, think about it. I mean, some people spend time knitting, and that's a lot of times that's used. I've seen people on public transportation, for example, women on public transport. Actually, I saw a man do it not that long ago in a place, whatever, in a situation where you're pretty much wasting time. Maybe some people don't like to read or watch movies or whatever. But even that, you can't really accuse somebody of like just treading water, wasting time, because it's relaxing. And maybe
and my wife spends most evenings doing some crafty thing, and it's, you know, it's her catharsis. It's how she recharges from her working day. So I don't always appreciate the things she wants to watch on television, but at the same time, if she's sitting carving on some gourd or knitting or painting or whatever, that's fine.
It's another good point, which is watching. I mean, I watch a lot of TV in the evening when we don't go out, and yeah, it's pretty much, a lot of it's worthless, really, almost mindless. Well, it's not mindless, but it's not challenging intellectually. But I mean, it does serve a purpose. Otherwise, you could accuse people of being lazy because they sleep at night, right?
Anyhow, go ahead, Jay.
I have 2 points, 2 different dimensions of time that are, I think, relevant to this conversation, and I'll just highlight them, and then we can pick them or talk about something else. But basically, time from a computational element, I think, is an interesting realm, particularly in this decentralized world that we're moving into, Web 3.0. It's often difficult to get agreement computationally in terms of what is the time that we're talking about. And number 2 is from an economic standpoint, particularly the daylight saving time element, the dimension of how a small group, and it could have been a group from way in the past, like the 1950s, will be able to introduce something where we all have to abide by it, we all incur costs around it, and yet it continues to persist, and it's rarely revisited in terms of, is this still relevant? So those are the 2 things that are kind of coming to my mind at this point.
You just opened up a whole other avenue that I would love to explore, and will in a second. But first, there was something I wanted to mention about art, because you were talking about music in time. And you're right, music, when people play in a group, you have to have the same beat in your head, basically, the same pulse is going on. And a lot of work has been done on this, by the way, and they're trying to make machines figure this stuff out. Yeah, that's all well and good. I'm all for the advancement of science. But, you know, the fascinating part is how musicians play together, and that is interesting.
Well, there's if I could riff on that a little bit too, you know, we talk about a comic's timing, comedic timing. And, you know, Michael, you brought up that I guess Corrado had posted a George Carlin video. That timing is a talent and an art. And it's something that's developed, to use a kind of a pun, over time. Over time.
Hey, we're over time. We're running over time.
So there is this interesting dance between time, human beings, creativity, expression, and the hard and fast nature of logic.
And before
computation.
Sorry, before I get into what I was about to get into, which it won't be long, it's just that I want to state it. There's a whole other aspect. You talk about timing of comedians. How about the timing in your car? I don't know if cars still use the spark is still timed, because, you know, we've moved along since I've ever owned a car even. But that's another aspect of timing. If the spark, at least in the old days, I don't know, is this still a thing even? I mean, does a spark?
I guess.
Combustion,
You really are
timing belt.
what y'all are talking about is time as a plane for relationship. It's just a different plane for relationship.
Yeah, but I mean, so there's that time, and there's another micro time, which is latency. Our friend Carl Fife would have a lot to say on this, but Google has decided that they're going to close Google Plus, but they're opening a gaming platform, the name of which I've forgotten. I think it's Stadia.
Stadia, yes.
Stadia.
Okay.
They're
We
so
can talk
good
about that after hours.
Yeah. Anyway, the point is that they've worked out a bunch of things, but many people are questioning whether the latency being the time it takes to get from your computer to the cloud or server and back. Here's what I wanted to say. This is this big, big principle. Picture yourself. This is time. Picture yourself in a museum where paintings are being hung, for example. You walk up to a painting and you are at a certain distance and you take in that whole painting. Maybe your eyes sweep over some details, but whatever the time is, you do see the painting all at once. And the painting probably makes an impression based on its whole. Sculpture, you have to kind of, if you're really going to be into it, you'd have to walk around it 360 degrees. Architecture, same thing. It's inside and out. In the case of music, there is no music without time. None. Because if you stop the time in music, even if you have like a recorder with a head that's rotating like a video recorder, so that thing is rotating, and so you stop it on a note. But it isn't even a note, it's just whatever the sample of the audio is. I don't know how clear that is to people who don't think in samples, but what I'm saying is that there is no reality to music without time. And what you were saying, Jay, about the duration of music, it is true that a pop song that's going to be played on the AM radio of the 1970s, 60s, 70s, 80s, when AM radio was a thing, would have been, I don't know, I can't remember if it's 3:30, 3 minutes 30, something like that. On FM, of course, it mattered less, but you still wouldn't want to go over, say, 5-6 minutes.
In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, baby.
Yeah, how long was that? Do you know? Let's look that up. Somebody look that up. Google In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. That's an incredibly long jam that they did.
Or Bohemian Rhapsody as well.
There you go. That's pretty long.
Oh, yeah.
But the fact is that symphonic music is in movements and can last, well, I don't know what the longest is, or opera, before the intermission, you may have 30, 40 minutes. You can also do medleys in jazz or popular music, or whatever.
17 minutes.
How much? 17?
17 minutes.
Interesting.
In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, baby. Gotta get the right words there. Anyway, so that's an interesting thing about the artistic end of it, is that without time, there is no music at all. And then that's not including the groove, the beat of the music. I'm just saying that if you stop the time, it doesn't exist. Whereas you could stand in front of a painting, you could take a photo of a painting, right? Or a sketch. So it's interesting that without time, music doesn't exist. I also want to, before I forget, because I'm probably the oldest person, not only in this conference of 3, but a lot of people who are listening, as you get older, time seems to move more quickly. And I'm going to ask my younger colleagues if they feel that. Is it because, okay, I think it happens for everybody, but is it because you're getting older and there's less of it? Or is it less in front of you, I mean? Or is it because you have more things on your mind that you have to do? Or why would that impression even be? Does anybody have an idea?
I have an idea. I think it's akin to traveling to someplace new. So when I travel to someplace new and I don't know the route and the route is new and whatever, it seems to take longer to get there. But then when I come back for the second journey or the third or the fourth, the time seems to get shorter. So maybe it's a perception of that's related to how familiar are we with our day-to-day activities, and we kind of consume the time or the perception in like tighter chunks, if you will.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point, because as you make the same trip, and it doesn't matter whether it's on foot, train, plane, car. Well, car, hey, there's a special thing about cars, which is that it's variable depending on where you live and how much traffic there is. But forgetting the traffic, let's say 3 o'clock in the morning, right? If you were doing a route 3 o'clock in the morning when there's no traffic in your city, it would still be variable time in your mind. And that would depend on your state of mind. And I have taken many, many trips between Paris and here in Bordeaux and Paris. And it used to be 3 hours, which was one chunk of time. And now it's 2 hours. And it's odd, but there's a huge difference, night and day difference between 2 hours and 3 hours on a train where you're not moving. So you might be reading, you might be looking at, I look at videos usually. I look at TV shows or movies. But in either case, doing one thing for between 2 hours and 3 hours, it's amazing the difference to me. Of course, it is 50% more, the 3 hours against the 2. So driving, you're supposed to be paying attention, not texting or talking too much. So it's a little bit different, but I'm sensitive to what you said, Jay. The same route, the same thing you're doing, maybe the same sites you're checking in the morning, even whatever it is you do that's routine, that time it actually is variable. And yeah, how many times have you said to yourself, God, it seemed like it took a lot longer to get here before, or something like that, or maybe the opposite? Crazy.
I think we're in for an interesting time, insofar as we go forward and employment shifts, as we have more automation, we have less menial work, things like this, as we move towards maybe a little bit more of a Star Trek kind of society. It'll be interesting because, you know, a lot of time right now, people get paid for their time. You get paid by the hour in lots of jobs. I know it's notable that in a lot of sort of oftentimes higher end fields, you don't get paid for your time, but you get paid for the outcome, for the result, or for the service rendered, not necessarily for the amount of time involved in rendering the service. And I'm just wondering if that's going to become more commonplace as we find ourselves with sort of less menial labor in the workforce, and as everybody becomes some kind of a knowledge worker, is time less of a factor in the concept of work, and maybe we work less. I would hope.
Another good point. If you're
go ahead. So yeah, so I think this brings up a really interesting point, Michael, between open source and closed source, because somebody in the open source community can make a very small contribution that other people either haven't seen or didn't recognize there was a need for. And that small contribution can make a huge difference.
It can bring tremendous value, yes.
Yeah. So I think as we, at least in the software and the technology realm, we are moving towards a more decentralized, community-based initiatives, and it becomes somewhat of it's more of a meritocracy rather, where we are valued based upon the value of our contribution and not necessarily how much time we've put into, you know, the initiative or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Valuation is not. Yeah. By the way, the most common sort of ideas of meritocracy cited in North America are, in fact, fallacious, but that's another story. Anyway, that's more societal.
But this kind of you know, blends into the computational side of time and so forth, and the whole ecosystem side of time. But a big part of what I think we're grappling with currently is the problem is called credit attribution. So in other words, how do you reward particular people in a community, like an open source community, for the value that they have provided? Because there's a big misalignment right now, I would say, in many instances, where it's hard to measure, how much value was provided by XYZ participant. And so I think that's one of the big issues for us to solve going forward, so that we can increase the collaboration, accelerate the collaboration, and continue to move in this decentralized construct that we're moving towards. Is how do you reward that? You can't simply put a meter on somebody's, punch in, punch out time. That's becoming less and less of an effective measure for value contributed. Does that make sense?
Yep. And the big problem is it takes some kind of agreement.
Yes.
So time is an agreed. So time is an agreed measure, and there's a long history behind it. That which is too bad about the Corrado rant not appearing at this point. But I mean, if he was saying that it doesn't make sense that the year is based on the revolution of the sun, to me, it does make perfect sense. I don't know. Does anybody understand what he was referring to there?
Well, I mean,
he's an engineer. He wants everything to be by 10, right?
You can go back through, though, the way things are done. I mean, as we've become more sophisticated as a life form, and we've been better able to measure our surroundings, we're then able
to give proof of that we're getting more sophisticated. But
well, okay, whatever you want to call it, as we now understand, for example, that the planets revolve around the sun, and we have some sense of how long that takes, and so you're able to build systems of understanding of knowledge, right? You know that a meter is this long, and there was a time when there was a gold meter that was the reference for that, but now it's not. Now it's something based on physics. It's based on the travel of some particle and some amount of anyway. That was a relatively recent change. You know that a kilogram is a standard unit of measure, and there used to be a standard kilogram somewhere. But anyway, so as we get more sophisticated with these measuring systems, the irrationality of the systems that came before comes to light. And we're not good at laughing at ourselves and past beliefs. And really, that's all you can do, right?
I think we are here at the VUC.
Well, the whole idea of that there was a king at some point, or was it a pope, or I can't remember, and we skipped 10 days in September because they had a problem and it was before leap years were invented, and that's not an invention. That's just a standard. We just say that, oh, well, I've been keeping track of this. Only thing is I can't keep track. I keep dropping the 10s and the 5s. So we have to have
leap year is an interesting point, actually, and that
we went temporarily bankrupt. We had to create an accounting principle to rationalize it.
Yeah, no, that may be what one of the things that Corrado would be ranting against is it's true that it's completely illogical. Spock would not approve of leap year. It doesn't make any sense. But what is the better system? Are you going to divide the year into what 1,000, for example? I mean, first of all, the fact that the United States isn't capable of using Celsius or metric system in any area at all pretty much proves that we're never going to get anywhere on any other system. So time, well, maybe in the year 3000, time will be measured differently, but it doesn't seem that we're ready to make any changes right now. It is crazy. That whole, 365 and a fourth is a little wacky, actually. But, it's in the mores of society, and we live with it, and every country deals with it. Because we may have time zones, but we all do have the same days, right? Not the same
the problem you have, and this conceptually spans lots of things. Is it's not that we have new understandings that are better. The problem is that we had an understanding that came before, and displacing that understanding is extremely difficult. Change is hard, right?
Yeah.
And look at, I hate to go back to well, I'll use telephony as an example. It was an invention in a lab. It was an experiment outside the lab. It morphed into a business. The business begat an industry, and it became intransigent, and it now cannot be displaced, even though there are much better ways of doing what it achieves. So it's the problem is displacing what came before, not that we always have new and better ideas.
And let me just I'm trying to think of the right word for this, but symbolize this with one simple word: Skype.
Mm-hmm.
It's, changing what came before. Everybody who I don't know will say, when we're going to get together and it's not going to be on a telephone, my Skype is such and such. So then you have to.
Except that's fading into disuse too. Now it's WeChat or whatever, right?
Well, that's partially because Skype keeps coming out with worse and worse versions of itself, and I don't know what that's all about. But yes, thank you, Google, also for introducing like 72 different kinds of messengers, so that nobody knows what's going on. And then,
Duo. The next one will be Trio, and then there'll be Quattro.
Yeah, well, that would be good. So Allo is dead starting April 2nd, along with Google Plus.
Goodbye.
Yeah, I mean, whoever used it. I mean, I'll bet everyone who has ever been on the VUC probably used Allo twice, once to test it and another time just to see if it was still working 6 months later, something like that. Jay, let's call on you. Well, wait a minute, before you get into the theory,
okay.
What are your preferred methods? Because we're talking about communication here. You're on wire with us. I'm going to guess you probably don't speak to anyone else on wire, by the way, just the nature of the thing. And then how else do you speak to people? More SMS, text, more, are you on WhatsApp? What else? What are you doing? This is a personal question. Feel free to answer subjectively.
So let's take an example of Slack. I was forced into using Slack because it has become this platform for communicating among the software developer community and maybe some others, but I'd say primarily software developers. GitHub, I think, definitely is both a repository as well as a communication platform. I used to use IRC until they, were bought, and then there was a spam thing, and then they put in just enough friction, at least for me, to not use it anymore, which is unfortunate. But my hesitation, and I think, Randy, you're bringing up some great points about Google Plus and all these other constructs. It becomes very expensive to try to adopt a new platform, not only because of the cost of learning and the time that it takes to learn, but there's also an uncertainty as to how long is this thing going to be around. And there's also an uncertainty regarding all the content that I've put into a given platform, like IRC or whatever, that can evaporate. Or Google Plus is a great example. So as we move to these, again, a more decentralized realm where we don't have a king or a queen basically saying, thou shall use Slack and only Slack, but now it's kind of up to the entire community as to what is the most valuable. As we move more and more into that, and these things are being tested and they come and they go, it becomes there's a higher cost to adopt basically any of it.
You're touching on something interesting, which is with regard to time, which is the attention economy. And the attention economy, which usually refers to, what you do during the day online and your clicks and your eyeballs and all that. But with regard to what you just said, which is, by the way, Slack, I mean, have you actually figured out everything that Slack can do? Because I was so unable to do that. I mean, it does a million things. It's great if you need that. Or how about Matrix? Matrix does a million things too. And I'm almost unable I have a simple task I want to do, which is to talk to you, for example. Well, Jay, we have email. Mike Elgin, the tech journalist, by the way, said something that I think one of the things that I agree with 100% of the things that he talks about, which is that the absolute best, most efficient social network and way to communicate is still email. I mean, young people don't use it. But the fact is, you could build your own social network. The VUC could operate on a mailing list easily. We could do everything we do on wire. Okay, difference in security level. But you could talk to anyone. Jay, you and I, if I need to talk to you, the email might be my first. We use wire, okay, but I can email you. Same with Michael. Talk to him on.
Look, I'm on the board of our civic association. This entire board, we communicate via email. It's the most inefficient, terrible thing, and we all say that we hate it because it's sort of so many one-line messages that are unthreaded and
they could be threaded. They could be threaded.
But it would be well served by a wire channel or by Gtalk or by Slack or by some of these other things. But getting a group of disparate entities over onto a different platform, it either has to be mandated through some kind of a top-down process, or I mean, I don't know. It's not happening.
Yeah, but then when you do get them on there, okay, so suppose, like I did, I dragged a bunch of people onto Google Plus, right? And we had our community. There were 850 people on the Google Plus community that will be dead April 2nd.
No, it's been dead for a while.
Well, it's been dead. Yeah, no, because I let it go
and
we didn't.
Walking Dead.
No, for sure. You're 100% right on that. But
so
it never was huge. Well, just to finish, Jay, it never was huge anyway. But my point is, even on Google Plus, I dragged a bunch of friends there, just like we went on Diaspora 8 years ago or so. When we all joined, I remember like Life, Madsen, and a bunch of other, people from the Asterisk world. And we all got on there once a year and go, hey, what's up? And then that was it. Nobody knew what to do. The point is, well, Diaspora actually, that's kind of a counterexample because Diaspora still works, still exists. And even the place that I joined that I'm talking about, that was Join Diaspora. I still have an account there, but that's closed. They don't expand. But diasp.org, for example, still open, still available. And there are many new ones. So the Federation, speaking of social, the federated stuff is gonna be around probably for a long time because it's been around for a long time already. But what the problem you're talking about, Michael, is that somebody could mandate Slack, but then they run against if they're putting images up there, there's a limit to what you can do free. So then it also becomes, do you want to pay? And I mean, hey, these are resources that are being used. So you should probably have to pay unless you're running your own and then you have expenses. But yeah, this is the old problem of what channel do I talk to you on? And
and as these things proliferate and hang around and never really die, it becomes more and more polluted in terms of the communication channels. And but to circle back to email, email was really the first killer application for the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And many of the attributes of email, even though they're in many respects not optimized in today's standards, but they're still useful, just like, the internet is still useful and the dimensions of the internet have expanded. But, most people, their first exposure to the internet was email, and maybe is still email, or I guess it's now Facebook. But
you've got mail.
So it's interesting, and I think we're touching upon some really interesting topics and dimensions in this conversation today. But there is this tug-of-war dance between things that we're familiar with that work well enough that we continue to use them, even though there are vastly superior new constructs. I mean, we don't have to look any farther than to look down and look at our keyboard to see, something was created actually with the intention of making it difficult to use, because it was these metal hammers, you know, pounding on this ink thing. And now we're still using it, even though the original reason for the layout of our keyboard is long gone. And, you know, but it works.
I have to disagree with you very mildly and politely, because this is what you said is 100% true. It's like talking to an engineer. What you said is 100% true, but it's not of any use. No, seriously, this is true. But for example, I text my brother. We talk pretty much every day. He is older than I am, and I'm not young. So, you know, these people in that, when you're over 70, a lot of people, I have two friends who are complete, don't even have smartphones. Okay. And they don't do text even. They do email on their PC once a day. But the point is, with my brother, I have a keyboard, you know, on Android, in the Apple world, you have a message which lets you, or iMessage, which lets you send SMS with a real keyboard on your laptop or on your desktop. And in the Android world, you have messages.android.com, I think it is, or maybe it's changed, but you also can use a real keyboard. So I do that with him. I text him, and I text my other friend who's also older and not used to it. And both of these people say to me, "Oh, you're going too fast. I can't handle it." But the reason is because they dictate. People who have a phone, I mean, I can't type on a phone, by the way, and I try to dictate when I can. But the point is, and by the way, that touches on time too, because if you're not a good typist, it takes forever. Whereas if you just take the trouble to pronounce things correctly, the dictation works great. But anyway, I don't, what was the part I was disagreeing with, though? It was that, yeah, the keyboard. The keyboard is going out, Jay. That's what my disagreement would be, that most people are not using anymore. The people who are young enough to have practiced on the phone with this thing, I can't do that. But for those who are good at it, that's no keyboard, right? Well, there's a keyboard paradigm. Yeah, there's a keyboard model. Yeah, you're right. But a lot of people dictate. So that's the new thing now. And the touch screen. So keyboard's a little less used now. But you're right.
So I should now start feeling ashamed, just as I feel ashamed when I call somebody with a telephone call that isn't set up in advance. I should now feel ashamed when I mention that I'm typing on a keyboard.
Well, I am too, and I do all the time. So there's nothing shameful about that. But I think it is going out, honestly. Not with me. I like the keyboard. And I'm peck and hunt. Is that the right word for that? Where you type with two fingers. But I'm fast at it because I'm used to coding and stuff. So, you know, it's to each his own. My brother can't type fast enough. My other friend who just got a smartphone, you know, and I can type 5 things before he responds. And so these people are completely overloaded with, you know, with a bunch of messages before they can respond. And plus they're not used to chat, by the way. Because it's just that's the world they're in. But for the majority of the world, they're in it. They're on WhatsApp. They're on Messenger. They're on whatever else there is out there.
You know, we all are like-minded, right? And that's, I mean, we in the VUC wire chat or VUC community generally. As I deal with some of these other folks, some of these other groups, you say, you know, your brother checks his email once a day. That's pretty good for somebody of that age group. I deal with some folks who have assured me that they will respond to my emails within 3 days reliably. And I'm like, 3 days? Holy crap. You know, I'm going to mail you a letter then because you'll get it sooner.
By the way,
that's just
typical.
the way it works.
Yeah, no, that's typical, but that's inexcusable in business. And you still find occasionally some businesses that take 3 or 4 days to respond. In fact, everybody's gotten that thing where you unsubscribe to something. It may take 3 or 4 days for this to take effect. Oh yeah, why? You know, I clicked a thing, you remove me from the database, and that's the end, right?
We're accustomed to that with banks because they want to hold on to our money for, you know, to make a little money along the path.
Good point. They can do a couple of extra mailings before you're
and why do they do that? Because of time.
Yeah.
Because
we're
things that valued over time.
That's an excellent point. Time, people don't realize. They think, well, we've got a lot of money in the bank, so they make a lot of money on us. Well, that's not quite true unless the money's moving, and the money moves in time. When you write a check, the time that the check is credited to somebody's account, that's the bank making money on that check. So if you wrote a check, this is in theory, of course, if you were able to write a check for, say, $100,000, that check in the day that it takes to clear, or 2 or 3 days even, maybe, oh, we have to do a little more checking on this, that's a lot of money. You're talking about a lot of money being made by investing. And that's what a bank does. I don't hold it against them. I'm just saying you're right, 100%. That's time, which makes money. Time makes money itself with no humans involved even.
Well, and in the decentralized world, there's the innovation frontier is in collapsing the time on some of these transactions and disrupting, the legacy banking system and so forth. There's a lot of experimentation that's going on right now, and has been going on, PayPal and, Zelle and all that stuff, Venmo. All of this is an opportunity to, introduce something new that disrupts what we've had in the past. So
intermediation, right? It's always somebody's got to make a commission. Somebody's got to be your agent. The bank has done that typically. I'm not really understanding why there are all these new, like Zelle. Is it Zelle or Zelle? Zelle, right?
Zelle.
You mentioned.
Yeah.
And the other thing that you or Michael mentioned, both of those are available on my bank, and I haven't figured out why the bank isn't just doing it directly. Maybe they have a deal, or there's some technology involved. But there's increasing hands in the pie, for lack of a better definition.
Well, I think the Zelles and the Venmos, and I don't think Venmo necessarily is the case, but Zelle certainly is a consortium and a collaboration among the banks to create something where they can transfer funds like at a retail level instead of using like Swift or whatever. But in the retail customers' eyes, they've introduced this Zelle in order to, I think, counter, the threat that occurred with PayPal. Because
and Zelle is based on your phone number, right? Or it's one of the ways you can do it, or email, one or the other. Right?
I don't know. I'm not.
Yeah, no, I think that when you want to send somebody, you can use their phone number or their email. I believe that's the case. Michael,
Right.
you and I have exchanged funds at one point that way, didn't we? Or did we do it directly through the bank?
Well, it was done through the bank in any case, but it was the bank's service, and the bank changed.
That was the
right at one point, because we both were banking with Wells Fargo. At one point, it was an internal thing, and then it changed to Zelle. I think it was
right
over time.
So there's two dimensions working in the Zelle model or PayPal model. One is it's quicker, which gets back to our theme today about time. But the other point, which actually is related to the time issue as well as the daylight saving, is the network effect. Because if, I can send money basically through a click of a button on an app to pretty much anybody, that's leveraging upon the network effect and the value of that ubiquity, which also harkens back to the email construct of a big part of the value proposition of email is it's a ubiquitous platform. So all these things kind of dance together, and I think it's becoming more and more difficult to separate, which one of the different dimensions is the key dimension that brings overall value in these things.
Mm-hmm.
So does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that to bring it back to time, I think that a lot of time is spent on choosing the channel, unless you're constantly communicating with the same people, in which case you've done that. And getting to know new channels is another thing that you spend time on. I mean, right now I'm exploring a lot of different federated platforms, Friendica and Hubzilla, for example, in addition to diaspora. And each one of these things has just enough difference. I mean, it's like learning languages. Okay, you learn one, then the next one's maybe a little bit easier, but it's still has nothing to do with the first one. This is how we spend our time, you know, and there's an argument for learning new things in that whatever your age is, learning new things is a good exercise for the brain, I find. I think it's good. But on the other hand, it all depends on the time you have. I'm very lucky because I'm pretty rich in time, having, you know, being retired and having all my time owned by me. I'm 100% proprietor owned. I own my own time. That's not the case for everybody, but it's lucky.
If I could make one other point, that's, you know, if we travel back in time, like even, you know, 150 years, let's say, to, you know, the mid 1800s, you know, if you're a family crossing, you know, moving from Kansas to California in a covered wagon, you don't have a whole lot of options in terms of how you're going to spend your time. You're going to be sitting in a wagon for most of the day, and then you're going to circle the wagons, do a campfire, you're going to tell some stories, and you know, you just, that's pretty much your choices. I don't think there were a whole lot of other choices. Today, you know, even the thought of my family sitting down and watching a sitcom together, which was the case not that long ago, I don't think anybody does that anymore. So, you know, I guess the point of all that is we are being bombarded with choices for our time and how we spend it. And it's, you know, in my mind, to harken back to that Econ Talk podcast, it makes time even more precious.
You know, it's fascinating that you mentioned that, Jay, because now no one watches TV at the same time anymore. And that creates a problem a lot. Well, broadcast TV is still the same, but so many people are watching cable shows and stuff, on demand stuff. And for example, Michael, I think you mentioned CBS. I'm pretty sure that All Access is on demand, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's an interesting other little thing about that, and that is that this week marks the 20th anniversary of TiVo, which was the first DVR.
Oh, actually, yeah. Well, the first DVR officially wasn't like VCR, taping stuff, though, right?
Right. No, first sort of DVR, and so I had a little exchange with the one remaining sort of blogger in that space, and he's basically saying that, you know, DVRs are kind of passé. They're out because everything is being done on demand, and schedules don't mean anything anymore. The broadcast schedules and
they sure mean a lot less, yeah.
Which is to exactly your point.
Yeah. Well, no, that's certainly true, and what Jay, what you were saying is totally true, and that brings us to the whole point of time and the fact that we just spent an hour talking about time, which is great. And we could probably pretty easily find another hour to talk about time, because there's so many aspects of time that we haven't covered. And
I'll be happy to complain for 30 minutes if, you know, you want to extend the podcast.
I would like to add something that's not temporally relevant.
Mm-hmm.
But I would like to point the two of you fine gentlemen to a new blog that we've launched for David Frankel. It's called Legal Calls Only. And it's
we talking about.
It's pivoted. It's a pivot from something that he was doing that's industry specific, but it's to a little bit more public facing. And David's begun blogging about this, and he's trying to do some stuff. And he was, in the last 2 weeks, he's been to DC twice and had some meetings, and he's getting some traction, but at the same time he's trying to put a public face on it. And I am merely facilitating, but it's good. And he finds, coming back to the theme of time, he finds it actually cathartic that if nobody reads this stuff, just writing his thoughts out and making routine observations and writing them down, he finds helps him relieve the stress of the fact that he's not progressing the effort as quickly as he might like to. But
is there a domain like legalcallsonly.com or anything? Because I just did a search.
Legalcallsonly.org.
Oh, .org. Okay, legal.
Cool. Well, on that note, gentlemen, I'm going to say goodbye, and I enjoyed the conversation, and I'm going to call my attorney.
Appreciate it, Jay. Good to have you.
Something I said.
Thank you, Michael. I'll remind people, because David Frankel is one of my favorite people, to check out legalcallsonly.org. How many calls did I get today? Probably in the last 24 hours, 3 or 4 spam spit calls, ridiculous ones about the auto loan from the United States. I don't live in the United States and I don't have a car, so thank you for that. And so many other typical examples like that. So, Michael, last words? Good night.
That's all, folks.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next week with VUC 746, and we'll be under the normal time in Europe.